Welcome to the podcast. I'm Mijo Biscan. This week we're chatting with mastering engineer Adam Dempsey. He has decades of experience as a mastering engineer, and this month, May 2020, he celebrates 25 years as a mastering engineer and in the business, in the music biz. So he's got a lot to offer and to share in this conversation. So he's based in Melbourne at Jack the Bear's Deluxe Mastering Studio. Adam's worked with Paul Kelly, Courtney Barnett, Angie McMahon, Jeff Lang, Mayfair Kites, On Diamond, Xavier Rudd, and thousands of other artists over this time. He has mastered most of my music from back in 2004, the first release I did with my band Lamplight. We took that to him and he did an amazing job. And as I mentioned in this conversation, the reason I keep going back to him is he's extremely good at what he does, but he also really cares about music. So in our conversation, we talk about how he got started in music, his adventures through community radio, playing in local bands, playing a number of instruments, trombone, drums, and landing his first mastering job in a cassette mastering factory, if you remember cassettes. We also chat a bit about creativity, his approach to mastering. We get into a couple of metaphors, forest and the trees metaphors. He also shares a couple of tips and good practices for preparing music for mastering, and also a couple of tips for if you want to get into mastering. If you enjoy this conversation, which I'm sure you will, please give it a 5-star rating in all the places in the iTunes store or in Stitcher or wherever. Give it a nice, delightful review to help us climb the crowded ladder of the podcast glory and be heard by other music lovers who would be into this kind of stuff. That would be much appreciated. So for any of the references we make in the podcast about music or any other ideas, I'll provide a link in the show notes, either below this video that you're watching or if you're listening in the show notes to this episode. So without further delay, here's my chat with Adam Dempsey. Here I am with Adam Dempsey, mastering engineer, legend. He's been involved in a lot of the music I've made over the last 10 years or so, even longer. We've probably known each other about 15, 16 years.
Yeah.
Welcome.
Hey, Mio. Great to see you.
Yeah, you too.
Yeah.
Cool.
Thanks for chatting.
Yeah, it's a pleasure. It's great. I think it's a great... one of the reasons I wanted to chat to you, there are lots of reasons, but one of the reasons is just the idea of mastering engineers, kind of tucked away, doing their thing. And even a lot of musicians don't really know what mastering is, what mastering engineers get up to. So this is a bit of a scoop. Expose. Yeah.
Emails.
Emails. Is that what mastering engineers do? Emails and rescheduling.
Lots. Yeah. Tetris.
Yep.
Tetris with bookings and emails.
Cool.
That's it.
That's
Done.
the main role. Done. And then sometimes listening to and making music sound extra delicious.
Little bit.
Yeah. So, the other thing that I love about you is your steady stream of hilarious things that you send to me through back channels that in the middle of my day I'm like, what's this? And I crack up. So that's another important role you play in my world.
It's easier than bad jokes that during a session go over most people's heads anyway.
Right. Cool. So
yeah,
it'd be great to just, start from the beginning, which is how you got into mastering, what your journey was to get to it and what really drew you towards, the art form. And then we might get into just talking about what it actually is that you do between emails.
Mm.
Yeah.
Sure. Um, I think I've been really privileged to have such a diverse working background, and I think most engineers of our age especially will know that they probably had a father who had records and tape machines and just delved into the music collection that way. So yeah, I mean, Dad built his own kit, hi-fi amp. I think he still has it, and he had a great record collection, and I have some of that. Had some old tape machines. So I used to play with these old tape machines and make echoes and stuff, and had some cheap microphones and things. So, there was always being sent to bed with parties raging and lots of music. And I was born in the year of the dark side of the moon. So, and ELO and all that stuff. So there was just always music. I think it was inevitable, really. I missed the football gene that other members of my family had.
Yeah.
Grandfather played footy and cousin played footy, and I never even was told what the rules were. So my interest just wasn't there. But music, yeah. And through school, I had a great music program. I was studying trombone, and we had the school rock band, so I ended up playing harmonica and then self-taught with drums, and kind of wish that I'd had proper tuition. I didn't really have the technique with drums to be able to execute what I could hear, and certainly a lot of the stuff I was inspired by. So it was just frustrating, but I did it. I got through it and played some Ringo-ish drums in several bands, and which is not a slight on Ringo at all, of course. And yeah, we had the radio station. So when I was in high school, we had the local radio station was there one day in their caravan, had a temporary studio. So I ended up getting involved with that out in the Yarra Valley. I had live to air shows when I was 13, just volunteering, just jumping into doing radio.
Yeah, right. And presenting
and the radio
at 13.
Yeah.
Or, yeah. Wow, that's awesome.
Yeah. It was pivotal because we had following the Ash Wednesday their full-time license with that community need of disaster plan and community information and community content. That was at a time when the FM spectrum was being divided up, so a lot of the commercial stations were being pushed down one end and a lot of reallocation for community stations. So there was a bunch going for their license at around the same time. We were one of them. It was called The Voice of the Yarra Valley, VYV. Yep. I made up a hand-drawn sticker design. I can't believe that it was just hand-drawn on my desk in pen or something, and they made stickers out of it.
Became the logo.
Yeah, for years. So they changed their name, the Yarra Valley FM. But so we had test transmissions from the caravan in lots of 2 weeks at a time, all around the place to test for their signal strength and where the transmitter should be. So I learned a lot just from volunteering, and I still recommend volunteering for anybody who wants. There's so many avenues, but you do have to jump in. And we got our full-time license, and I was training people and. Yeah. But, studying music, I remember when it was a revelation to me to learn how records were made and that things weren't all recorded live.
Okay.
That multi-track recording existed, and I had a friend who had an 8-track studio when I was playing with his tape machines and whatnot. And so, just it was in a way a natural progression, but in terms of mastering specifically, it was a bit of an accident. As most things are. I thought I wanted to do mixing. I wanted to get into studio mixing. Because it is more creative. There are a few people who can make a living out of just mixing. But I was pretty privileged, I think, because I was playing in the band, so I was doing some live sound as well. And a bit of a grounding from that. After high school, I worked on a farmhand. I've worked on a flower farm and berry farms. I've done worked in a bookshop on school holidays. So there's a lot of, all these things brought something, everything. There's customer service, there's attention to detail, deadlines, just, discipline. I was putting up TV antennas on roofs. I learned about cables and how to terminate cables. And
yeah, right.
and we had
so there's lots of different job situations or pieces of learning that were not connected, well, not directly connected, but somehow all came together to give you skills to understand just electronics, electronic pathways, sound waves, music, transmission, frequency spectrums, all that stuff came in drips and drabs. And was it a case in all the bands that you were in, was it a case of you becoming the tech guy because you had enough of the information to do the thing, and then that kind of, put you in that role to learn more and more?
Yeah, eventually. I wasn't really up with computers when that started happening. There was one band I was in, we started doing demos and recording, and he had a system that I really couldn't get my head around, and that was even when, email was starting up, and so I kind of left a lot of that to him. But my background was pretty old school in a way, really. It was all tape machines.
Yeah.
Even when I started mastering for cassette tapes, it was all tape machines. There was no computers involved at all. But yeah, I was pretty lucky to have that grounding. I had some casual work running microphones and cables for the Channel 10, the Uncle Toby's Iron Man series, and running up and down the cliffs at Portsea. And
right.
It was casual work. I'll never forget one of the most stressful days of my life. If we're going to tell little stories here, it was a 3-day setup, and then it was live to air, and then about a 3-hour pack up. Several hour pack up live on site. And we had 2 audio feeds. One was for the PA at the finish line of the Uncle Toby's Iron Man series, and one was for broadcast, and it was an international broadcast, Canada and Europe, I think. And we thought everything was fine, and I'd help with the cabling and batteries for radio mics and all that sort of thing. But we didn't have both audio feeds running, and it was up to me I was told to go down there and dig in the sand and try and find the fault while the satellite link waited for me.
Right.
And to this day, I don't know what went wrong. I couldn't find the fault. Someone else eventually found it.
Right.
And you just have to fess up. You can't hide those things. You just fess up and be honest and say, look, it was beyond me on that day. And so, I suppose that blessing there was communication skills and listening skills and all that sort of thing.
Yeah.
I was doing second boom mic operating for Crawford's Productions. They had a studio in Hill. Yeah. That's where the Sullivans and
right.
these
I was going to ask
classic TV shows. Yeah. So that was great, just learning microphones and audio and the rivalry between sound crews and lighting crews and who gets to run their cables up and that sort of thing.
Right. Is it like an arm wrestling match at the start of any job? You got to send in your strongest person.
Because I was brought in as a casual, it was really quite hard to fit in. They were quite such a team. They were really a team, and they would do 2 weeks on location and 2 weeks studio and keep alternating and just churning out these made-for-TV films, really, movies.
Yeah, right.
I was working on a TV show called The Feds about federal police, and day one was shooting at a quarry out in the Yarra Valley, and I went to the wrong quarry. Another quarry, and went there, and there was no mobile phones or anything. It was just follow the instructions. So day one was the final scene of a huge siege sequence involving a petrol tanker and a hostage, and tanker goes over the cliff and it's a huge explosion, and so they needed a second boom mic operator for that. So that was my
for the
day
explosion
one.
just standing there like Shield your eyes.
Yeah. Or just learning camera shots and how tight they are, and sometimes you'd have to mic from beneath rather than over the top, and other times you'd have your arms up in the air for ages and ages. And
Yeah.
don't wear a watch. If you want to get involved in being a boom mic operator, do not wear a wristwatch.
Why is that?
For beeping reasons and reflections. So,
Right.
I
And
learned
the
both of those.
extra 100 grams on your arm that you got to hold up.
Yeah, maybe. Yeah. So I learnt those lessons quickly. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, but
Cool.
it was all that stuff. I was on the dole for a little while. I was delivering leaflets and still playing in bands and doing letterboxing stuff. And then I got a job. There was actually a job advertised for a cassette factory in quality control, and I landed that job probably because of other stuff.
And what does that involve? Quality control at a cassette tape factory? That's
really what mastering is. It wasn't advertised as a mastering position per se, but what it was essentially sitting in a room, transferring whatever came in onto a quarter-inch reel tape that was formatted for cassettes.
Yeah.
And you would sit in this little room and making sure that the recording level was correct and listening for faults and dropouts.
Right.
You do side A and then side B, or whatever side was longest first, and then flip it over and do the other side. And if anything went wrong, start again.
Yep.
And then box it up and label it and walk into the factory, and they'd start making cassettes from that.
Yeah, right. So that's basically one of your first mastering jobs, or the idea of mastering? Sitting there listening from having experience of sitting in the mastering studio with you, I'm kind of picturing just that attention to detail that you do have, which is quite both ninja and Zen-like. Just like hearing all these things that beyond my listening capability, but also just the patience involved. Is that a huge part of mastering? Because I know just from doing mixing and stuff myself, I'm wanting to hop around and just like fix things really quickly. And it's only really at the end of, I don't know, feeling like I've done all that I'll sit back and listen to the entire thing without stopping it and whatever. But that's a huge part of what you do. So maybe tell us a little bit about that process, even just when you are listening to a track for the first time or whatever. What are you sort of doing there?
Yeah, it's all feel, isn't it? Because you're great. You teach creativity, and I mean, I'm in awe of how people finish songs and write songs, and how painters finish a painting, and how you finished, and and that side of all those subjective aspects. It's eventually about letting go, and does it meet your vision, or is it more about the process? And in mastering, there's two issues that I still wrestle with. I've been doing this 25 years this month, and still need to be able to both. You need to make a connection to it musically, but you also need distance. You need to maintain some separation to be objective. And you're only here for the first time once. So you're listening for the trees, for the forest rather than the trees. You hear it, and you know really quickly whether it needs this or that, or what's going to work in terms of the signal chain, the processing, or anything. I mean, for cassette mastering, it was literally, we had one equalizer, one compressor, and a fader. It was a modified mixing desk, and it was fine. And a Dolby system. It wasn't all music, by the way. Too, a lot of it was patience and listening, marketing, and spoken word. I don't know how many viewers might be familiar with DAT tapes, digital audio tape, little 4mm digital tapes, and they were very prone to glitching. So that's where I picked up my skill of hearing clicks and pops and things. We weren't allowed to leave the room. That was the company policy. If you were coming from a DAT and you missed a dropout or a glitch, and you couldn't risk that going onto the production line. So and you had to start again if you heard that. So we had several machines ready. If it wouldn't play on one, it would play on another. So another part of the job of mastering is just getting the best playback, finding the best source, starting off on the right foot. Because the better that is, the better everything subsequent will be. So so it was just interesting for me to sort of shift away from the thought of mixing and being creative into the minutiae of what really matters and how to minimize degradation at every step, and being a bit of a perfectionist. And I like finishing things. And if you want to be a great mastering engineer, you generally are someone who doesn't want to sit with the same project for weeks and weeks or months and months like a great mix engineer or a producer would do. Does that kind of shed some light on that side of things a bit?
Yeah, definitely. That sort of the visual of the forest and the trees, sort of the detail and the bigger picture. Because as a songwriter, those two modes, and in all the stuff I teach about creativity, there's essentially these two modes you want to get into. One is that free, open, creative mode where you're connecting more to emotion and expressing emotion. And then there's this other side, which is the technical aspect of, I don't know, is that chord sequence? I don't know, can I go from that chord sequence to this chord sequence and do voice leading and more technical, theoretical stuff? And both are really important. And it's one of the things also why I keep coming to you with my music, because that part of what you do is so developed, like just your aesthetic in your musical taste and your musical aesthetic. There's obviously an emotional connection to music, very deep emotional connection, as you were saying, like pretty much from the day you were born with Dark Side of the Moon playing in the background somewhere. So there's that emotional aspect. And then, but the technical side you've developed so deeply as well.
Yeah, it's a yin and yang. Like I said, you've got to make a connection with it, but you've got to feel it. And you maintain some degree of distance so you can know what, does this matter, doesn't. If you're working with a client, there might be some indecision, and you can help them through it and say, well, this is what I think, and have a listen, and what do you think? And not there's never a single way of doing anything. Whether it's changing the sound slightly or the pace of the album is very important as well. Some people may dispute that because there's so many singles. It's a very single oriented, but there's still albums, still really important. I'm just in the middle of one now where we're just tweaking some of the transitions from song to song, and very, very slight moves. But it's maybe some people listen to music a lot, like intently, what you would call active listening rather than passive listening. And this is certainly the case with your tracks and the amount of time and attention put into the arrangements and the mixing. Is that when you listen with intent, especially with headphones, which are, if it's a good pair of headphones, they're like a microscope on everything. Just to listen to that and know that everything you're hearing, apart from maybe some performance idiosyncrasies, everything's there. Everything you hear is intentional, no matter how subtle it is. The positioning of a sound or the timbre of it, whether it's a dry sound or a wet sound, all that's intentional. And to me, that's just fascinating to be able to discover and rediscover that stuff. Listening. And maybe it's almost like when you're watching a film and you see everything in the frame is what matters, and there might be people standing just outside that frame. But the lighting is, and the colours that are used, or the props that are in that shot, all of that. So it's all part of yeah, it's a craft.
Yeah.
There's many layers.
Yeah, definitely. Let me have a look. One question I wanted to ask you was about related to that aesthetic that you have, or the emotional connection to music. Just how being a musician, playing a couple of instruments and being in a band situation and understanding maybe what bands are trying to do, like with their music, maybe the end result of what they're doing. How has that experience sort of influenced how you go about your job in general? So that might be even how you communicate to clients, or how you approach the mixing process itself, or what you prioritize and what you don't prioritize.
Mm-hmm. How do I approach it?
From having a musical background as
okay, well, yeah. In the communication side of things, it definitely helps to be able to talk if people are talking in terms of instruments, like being able to hear the difference between a horn and a trumpet, a French horn and a trumpet. I mean, I used to play trombone. I liked that mellow tone. I wanted to play saxophone. They didn't have any, but at the time. And I find, I mean, trumpets are very easy they can go sharp a little bit, and I find myself very sensitive to that, to trumpets when they're sharp. And there's a few trumpet players I know who are always dead on, and that kind of, to me personally, that really stands out. They're dead in tune. So being able to hear and recognise different parts, being able to talk in terms of bars if they're talking editing and you know where things are at, or time signatures, having been a drummer. Just communication, it helps. There's also I mentioned before about the duality of maintaining some objectivity but making a connection. There's also the one involving the sonics, and whether you're processing something and how you do that. And that also comes down to usually less is more, but sometimes whatever it takes. So I knew pretty quickly with your stuff, it was some of the tracks were nice and dense, and I knew where we could take them and not over densify them, and let the light shine through, if you want to put it that way. And I did a track the other day that came in and there was almost no bass, no bottom end, and I had to I took it on because the client wasn't in a position to say, oh, can you tell us what you think, we're not sure about it. That if that happens, if that's the way they come to you, then that's what you do. That's part of the service, obviously. But if someone comes in saying, we've taken this as far as we can and we're happy to do your thing, then that's what you're paid to do, is to do your thing. So unless it's really not going to happen, if it's just not possible due to physics, or if it's not, you just know that it's not going to translate, or it's problematic, or if you really can't hear it in your mind as an engineer where it could go, you need the potential. Otherwise, as a friend of mine used to say, the possibilities are mindless. In regards to Chris Core, I worked on a lot of albums with Chris Core, who used to be head engineer at Platinum Studios in South Yarra, which is Sing Sing South.
Okay, yep.
He engineered one of my favourite albums of the 80s, which was Models, Out of Mind, Out of Sight.
Yep.
And we worked a lot of stuff, learned a lot of stuff from him as well. He would always take a Roland delay unit with him wherever he was working, mixing, because he would use that delay as a pre-delay for his reverbs. So whatever reverbs he needed, he knew that would help to delay the effect of reverb a little bit. Okay, right. So little things like that you pick up on, not just adding reverb to something, but how to use it to bass. Right. And so if you have creative decision,
relatively new concept at that time, because now it's become a part of most plugins and things kind of have this pre-delay idea.
Yeah, obviously it's all it's built in as a parameter. For that reason, it's useful and it works. But having that intention behind a creative decision, whether it's recording, mixing, songwriting, or mastering, being able to hear you've got to hear the destination in your mind and work to that. Otherwise, the possibilities are mindless.
Yeah.
There's so many ways of accomplishing anything. So
yeah, absolutely. When it
that
makes
has
me think of, go ahead.
Sorry, that has benefits in mastering because you often need to work pretty quickly.
Yep. Yeah, when it comes to songwriting, it relates to something you said earlier as well, which is there are as many ways to write a song as there are songs. That's kind of my belief, that there's many different starting points, and there's many different unconscious creative decision points that you go off. And in a way, I think of it as creative problem solving, and you're making all these tiny little choices all the time. And if all of the options are completely open, it does become quite overwhelming. And I've found in songwriting an important part of actually starting quite open. And once I get into a kernel of something, I'm really actually just sharpening that idea rather than branching out further.
Yeah.
But yeah, it can become quite overwhelming. And it's same in the mixing process. There are just, the possibilities are mindless. Get
So
lost in that, for years and years.
The song tells you what to do, and I'm sure you found it helpful with collaborating with people like Marty Brown and others that you've worked with.
Yeah.
You had Danny McKenna on drums, so it's just like, here's the song, and he'll take care of it.
Yeah.
So I'm sure that for you that having that collaboration and everyone working to their own strengths also pushes everything in the right direction.
Yeah. I guess that's when it came to recording drums on the album, I thought about doing it myself. I have played drums in the past. I'm not an amazing drummer, but I thought, I'm pretty clear on, I think I know what I want. But then I just thought of how much longer it's going to take me, and I'm probably not going to get ultimately what I want. And so when I got in touch with Danny, a big part of that was of sort of giving him a lot of the creative space to do what he needed. But also because he's good at that unconscious decision-making process when it comes to that drumming world. And I guess that's kind of what you get when you bring in a great collaborator, is they already know that world so well that they can make probably, better decisions, I suppose, in that world. And that's why people bring mastering stuff to you, because they're trying to figure it all out themselves or whatever is completely mind-boggling. When I got in touch with you recently for some mastering advice or mixing advice, and you sent me these amazing detailed videos that were so dense, I had to constantly pause and go, all right, what did he just say there? All right. It was just about the mono mixing idea, which we can talk about. But
well, we had a pre-production. I remember you came in and you had some demos and some ideas, and the first thing we did was just listen to the whole lot, and you asked me about impressions of whether there should be horn sections or string sections and all that sort of thing. And that would have been, how long ago? 2.5, 3 years ago?
Yeah, probably. That was after I did a first run of demos that I just recorded and mixed myself, I think, and then brought them to you.
And I just gave you my thoughts, and we pretty much agreed on everything. I thought I could kind of hear some horns there, and you said, yeah, already had that in mind.
Yeah.
So it was really interesting in that way to hear it all evolve, and that you probably were further along. Sorry, just
right. Lost the video. Here we go.
Okay.
Yeah, we're back. We're gone. We're back.
Somebody just tried to call me. Yeah, you were probably further along than you might have thought at the time in that creative process.
Yeah. Yeah, maybe. maybe. But that, I mean,
So
that's
from a mastering point of view, it always helps. I can always tell if someone's either had collaboration or if they really know their speakers really well.
mm,
You can tell how ready they are as soon as you hit play.
yeah. So yeah, related to that was it's the idea of I mean, getting down to something a bit more practical as a, the common things you see that you wish you didn't see. You know, people. What are like the common mistakes that musicians do make, and projects you've worked on where, I don't know, 10 seconds into it, I don't know, this mix isn't ready, or this is not ready to be mastered yet. What are some of like the key things that like jump out at you? And one is before you've even heard it, maybe you get an email from them and you're like, oh.
Yeah. Well, I have some tips on the website. I have some tips in my email signature. There's little notes there on how to send them through and what formats and information to include. A lot of people just don't seem to see that or read it. I find myself answering questions only to use. There's a lot of questions. So, if you're working with an engineer, it's really your mix engineer's role to worry about that stuff. It's not your role as if you self-produce, if you're doing it all yourself, then sure, ask questions and happy to help. But if they're mix issues, the last person you need on board is a mastering engineer. You need a mix engineer. If you're aware already that your mix needs some help, and maybe there's some technical aspects to that rather than just creative aspects. We as mastering engineers, we can give you our first impression, but the more involved we get with that, the more impossible it is to be objective when we master it. And we're not paid per dial or per switch that we flick or per knob that we turn to make adjustments. So if something's sounding fantastic and just needs a little bit of top or a little bit of bass or just that's still mastering. That's did an album recently for someone that's coming out mid-year, and the mixes came in really hot, really loud. But he and the engineer were happy. They worked on it, and it sounded good. And so the last thing that I would need to do is just tell them to do it differently, and they just needed some digital adjustments, just some fine tuning here. That wasn't about changing sound at all. So it's worth trying to combat that misconception about mastering being changing things. It's really about doing whatever is necessary, and sometimes that is helping people through the process. And if you're self-produced and you're working in isolation, figuratively or literally, there's a lot of assistance you can get. There's a lot of tutorials on YouTube which can be helpful, but ultimately, if you're working or getting answers from someone who does it for a living, and like I said, if it's a mix issue, and if you can get some help from someone who does mixing, that's going to help when it comes to mastering as well. So it can be a bit of a surprise when I say that it's mastering's the least most important process, as vital as it is. It's also most important. So it's just about being prepared. Think about how you want the whole thing to be laid out in track sequence or the pace of the album. And if you have a mix engineer, let them worry about the formats and the peak levels and all that sort of thing. And if they have questions, they can ask. But it's always relationships and trust. It's all about trusting. If they send it on to someone that they trust will do the right thing. I think trust is a really, really huge issue when it comes to your a musician handing any part of that project over to someone else. But I'm realizing we're using the terms mixing and mastering a lot, and I think most people who listen to this are probably musicians or musically inclined and probably know what those things are. But I thought maybe we could quickly define them, and it might also highlight more of what you do, and we can maybe go into a bit more detail. But
maybe do you want to define them? Maybe in this day and age, what mixing is and...
Yeah. Well, if songwriting is planting the trees and mixing is maintaining the trees, pruning the trees,
yeah, pruning,
then in the right way, and mastering is taking an aerial view of the forest. I don't know, something like that. Yeah, mixing your all the sounds for the song, and in mastering you're playing the songs for the whole release.
Yeah.
So it's all about context. It's all about context. There's been a few EPs that I've worked on that have been fun to work on, but very challenging because I get sent one song at a time, and that's really common now.
Right.
I had a client yesterday contact me about an EP and said they've got one song ready and another 4 to come. And if you're not in a rush, if you don't have a deadline for the single, let's do them together.
Yeah.
So there's context. So it's all about context, and track one may not be the signpost for the rest of them either.
So if we just ground some of the mixing and mastering in very practical terms. So musicians go out and often will record different instruments of their song separately. This is probably the most common way of doing it these days, I suppose. The way we did my album was we recorded a lot of that live together, drums, bass, guitar, and some of the vocals. But then I went off, so I used my album, I suppose, as an example. And then I added all these extra tracks, overdubs. So I did vocals, some extra keyboard parts. Danny McKenna came back in and did some percussion. So we have all these separate things. And then mixing them is basically, in very basic terms, getting a level balance so that you can hear everything pretty clearly, and you can pan it left and right, balance it. You can add effects and things like that. And then out of that comes a stereo track, one stereo track. It all gets mixed down, stirred in a pot, mixed down to a stereo track. And then that stereo track comes to you. And then...
Sorry, I was being pretty obtuse before with my...
No, you're using the metaphor, which is handy. It's good. But for people who... They'd be like, what? What's the tree? So is that the musician or is that the guitar?
Yeah.
Is it made of wood? So,
So
this is kind of
and
101.
Yeah, and if a tree fell, would you hear it and all that? But so we get all the songs that are already mixed, and it's really important that you're already happy with them at that point. Because if you're coming to market with a bunch of songs and you're not sure about the mix balance, it usually means it's either not quite ready, or sometimes it's worth just bouncing out an alternate version, maybe with the vocal up a little bit, or the vocal down a little bit, or the bass up a little bit, or just and label them that way. Nothing's necessarily written in stone that way, but it's also about knowing your speakers. If you've had enough time to check it on different systems when you're mixing, to finesse those final balance issues of balance, especially if it's a focal point like a lead vocal. There's been a few occasions where I've heard recordings that have some really nice backing vocals, but you can tell that all the backing vocals were recorded in the same place with the same microphone, the same distance. If there's any little problems in the recording space, those things build up and they layer upon layer, and it becomes very cumulative. And those generally this is a recording thing really, but it helps with the mixing process to be able to combine sounds that have differences. So for example, if you have a bunch of vocals, you might record them at different distances from the singer, or with different microphones that suit their voice, so that when you combine them, they have a natural tendency to mix, compounding any problems with the acoustic space or the mic or cable or whatever.
Right.
So you hear those things in mastering, and the more you can just be aware of that side of thing when you're recording and mixing.
Yeah.
Anything that you can do, I think, to create contrasts in a mix, where you might have a really reverby sound and a dry sound together, or a really wide or a really narrow sound together, or a really bright and a dark sound together, or a really staccato-y versus something really soft and gentle and smooth. They all come really well, and that's, I think, is what people unconsciously, perhaps, is what people want to hear when they hear a track, and they want to be able to have clarity. Unless you're a punk band and you're recording it all in a room and it's just all in, go for it. So
yeah, totally. Excellent. So I thought we might tap into a few stories to finish off with. So I remember you told me a story. I won't name the album because you might tell the story, but of an album that came in with very disparate sounds and sources, and it was a really tricky mastering project. What's one of the most challenging mastering projects you've had to kind of undertake that you felt like you came to a good solution to?
Challenging for me lately is more of a time thing. So if it's really fiddly, something that comes in that has lots of alternate versions, and so the artist's perception of how much time is involved with this versus what's really needed can be night and day. So I did have an album which I'll say from the beginning here that this was worth doing because of the songs, and it's always comes down to the songs, and that's what made it. They were great. The songs are great. But it was very involving, lots of edits, little fix-ups, a couple of singles that had different versions. The one might be longer than the other, slightly different fade-outs. One had a violin solo, and another version of the same song had a harmonica solo. And then there were very particular crossfades between the songs and sound effects between the songs. And then he was doing vinyl as well, so the whole thing needed to be essentially done twice,
right?
For digital and for CD and for vinyl. Vinyl has its own little technical requirements, just to make it easy for when it goes to the plant and gets cut, physically cut on the. So yeah, it was just a time issue, just to make sure we had enough time to get it done properly, and there were subjective elements to the edits and that side of things. So on a typical day, I mean, I can lock out time for that, and then you've still got other projects coming in and singles that need their own and allocating time for.
So I guess when there's lots of variables, and what's the purpose of the alternate takes? Were they because they were going to be released in different ways or in different markets, or just one's a radio edit, one's something else, or extra album content? Or
in that situation, I'm not quite sure. I think often it can help to have a radio edit. If you're unsure, you might just have a version that you might lose 8 bars of an intro, or have a shorter fade out, or that's something like that. That might, if you send it to radio, and whether it's a commercial station or an independent station, it gives them options. They'll look at their playlist and see what they have time for. So a radio edit, and ideally it shouldn't be much of a compromise. I mean, Stairway to Heaven still gets played on the radio. Nobody complains.
I heard Bohemian Rhapsody in the car the other day. It was amazing.
Yeah. So, and all those great songs, they all broke the mold in some way too. I think every great album that stands the test of time has broken a mold, and people should really not be afraid of doing that. I think some of the greatest acts we've ever had have always evolved in doing that, whether it's been, In Excess did that, U2 did that, Radiohead's done that. But yeah, do your own thing, keep it real, but
Mm.
put boundaries and collaborate where you can. If I had to give any other advice just quickly, it would be to just, if you can check it on a range of different speakers, do that, large speakers and small speakers, and in mono, make sure that if you're listening on a single speaker or on a phone with a single speaker, that you're not losing parts that should be there in the mix. So mono, if we need a quick explanation, meaning that you've got the same sound coming out of both speakers, so that when you hear it on one, you've still got everything there.
Mm.
As opposed to stereo, where in stereo you have differences between left and right, and most sounds will still be down the middle there. But mono compatibility is very important still for broadcast as well. There was one story that came to mind that I thought of before we started this chat. I wanted to mention about the so I first met you, we did an EP for Lamplight.
It might have been a full album, or was it an EP? No, I think it was our first album.
The Fitch Will Walk.
Yeah.
And that's when I met Kirsty as well. So it's been great to work on that one. And then the other one, the self-titled one, came along, and you worked with engineer Miles Mumford on that one.
Yep.
And we worked on that. And when it came out, I took it to a friend's place. He's a composer and teacher, and I just had a feeling he would love it. And we just played the whole thing. I didn't tell him anything about it. I just said, I think you'll love this, and we had time and played the whole thing through. And only afterwards we finished, and he said, there's ghosts on that album. So I might have told you that story, but I'm sure others might be interested, because that, as you might want to talk further on, I mean, that was largely recorded in Castlemaine Jail and parts of it in solitary confinement cells. So that certainly came through, or something that's hard to put into words came through on that album.
Yeah, that's amazing for someone to give that a really good listen from beginning to end, and for that to be the conclusion. Because we recorded I don't know if we recorded most of it, but I'd say about half of it we recorded in the old Castlemaine Jail that we hired for a weekend, and we brought everything in. Miles brought in all his gear. We set up in this main area. Luke Richardson was playing double bass in one of the prison cells. There was a piano there for some reason. So Kirsty was playing this upright piano. Indiana, she was in another room. So we got all this isolation happening. And then I went down to do my vocals in the solitary confinement little cage. It was like this bluestone thing underground, pitch black, the size of a closet. Like, it was so small. And I had, between takes, like, I've got headphones, so I'm kind of hearing Miles giving me instructions. But when he wasn't talking to me, I was only in there, I don't know, maybe a couple of hours or less. But there'd just be like stuff coming out of the pitch black at my face. Like, it was pretty fucking terrifying. And I think you can hear that in the vocal takes. Yeah. Like, you can hear a bit of a quiver in my voice, and it was really hard to breathe down there. It was very damp and moist. So it was hard to take in nice deep breaths to do powerful, vocals or whatever. So it was very kind of strained, and I was very nerve-wracked. So it's so interesting.
And that worked in its favour in the end, would you say?
Yeah. A big part of that album, so it's the self-titled Lamplight album. A big concept of that album was how spaces affect performance, like musical performance. Whether playing outdoors somewhere creates a difference in your musical performance, or if you're in a prison cell, or where else did we do? We did them in, well, Indiana's home that she grew up in. We did some out around a campfire. And the interesting story about that one, if I can hijack the podcast for another minute, is we did, I don't know if you remember this song, One Piece to You, One Piece to Me, which is this love song, you know, falling apart, basically. And we did about 5 takes of it. And between each take, it was like dark, and we would all just sit there and there was a fire and we'd just look at the stars. Then we'd just do another take. And then when we went to listen back to them, the final take was almost half the speed of the first take. And so just being in that environment just made us all slow down so much and become very present. Yeah. And all the playing was very detailed and delicate. And so, it was an interesting concept to work with, and it definitely had an influence on all the songs on that record. Yeah,
I would say. And I think that's happening a lot now. I'm hearing projects coming in that are just having that enforced sense of slowdown imprinted on them, from whether it's performances or just the extra time in mixing.
Yeah, right.
I like people are, because people aren't rushing to get their singles done for their launch gig. And I think there's a lot of, they're maybe not all aware of it, but it seems to be more time being put into things at the moment.
That's really interesting. I wonder if there's also a difference between studio time recordings versus at home, you know, bedroom recording kinds of things, where there's time and space, and as you know, studio time can be expensive, and there's just this red light flashing in the back of your mind and all this pressure, like, we got to get this take. Let's not talk too much about it. Let's just get on to the next take. The tape's rolling. Time's money. Let's get this right. Yeah. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, it's one reason I've never liked charging by the hour, and I don't. I'd rather just put it all together and let's just whatever we need to do to get it done. So the last thing you want when you're finishing your project is more surprises. So anything we can do to make it easier, do that. I look, there's all this talk online and forums. There's always plugins and software and things always moving. But I think if you can invest time more into things, and then as I'm saying that, I'm thinking, okay, you still got that issue of how do we let go? How do we know when it's done? Could you just keep going and going and going? But yeah, just having some time. When I say time, I mean also time away from it. So if you're working on something and you're feeling, and I'm sure you touch on this with your creativity workshops, just having that aspect of whether it's silence or just distance, or a regular routine of taking a walk or doing some gardening or getting some fresh air, or anything you can do to enforce an extra element of a slower pace can help. When I started, and when a lot of engineers were making classic records, you were forced to make breaks with tape machines. You had to stop to rewind the tape, or to change the tape, or to clean the machine, and that largely doesn't happen. And you have to enforce. You have to enforce it. You have to bring on breaks and keep that headspace.
Yeah, it's true. With digital recording, you can just keep it rolling and keep it looped and do 100,000, vocal takes in a row. And after, well, in my case, after 4 or 5, the quality of them just you hit this peak, and then it just goes, and then I've got to go take a break, go take a walk, do something else, come back to it fresh. Yeah.
And knowing what time of day works for you. One of my favourite local singers will record themselves at home at night time. That's what works for their vocal. They do all their vocal, right? Just having those breaks.
Awesome, Adam. Thanks, man. It's been really great to actually get to chat about these things in more depth. Like, we get to hang out in the studio, but we're both kind of got our minds on a project. So it's good to good to chat to you. I feel like we're scratching the surface. There's so much more to sort of talk about with mastering and music and approaches to all of this. Is there anywhere you want to send people so they can get in touch with you and whatever, ask questions or do work with you?
Well, you can always find me on the internets. If anyone's overseas, they can book me through Sound Better.
Okay.
Another one. It's a great resource to find mix engineers and mastering engineers and musicians as well. There's a lot of musicians who have themselves set up there for session work on Sound Better.
Yeah. And so it's adamdempseymastering.com is the best place to get all your info and your catalogue. People should go. I was checking out your website to read up on your bio and stuff, and just seeing your full back catalogue of all the work you've done. There's some amazing records in there, amazing artists, lots of well-known artists who are huge right now, Courtney Barnett and Angie McMahon and others. Do you want to name some?
It was a privilege to work with Paul Kelly, with Charlie Owen, when they came and had a chat with him about his songwriting process and how he still use his phone to get ideas down and all that sort of things. That was a great privilege to work with Paul.
Yeah.
The album was called Death's Stateless Night. It was a album, funeral dirges.
Yeah, right.
Tastefully done. And Angie's awesome. Melbourne band On Diamond are awesome. Everyone's awesome. Did an album for Big Smoke that was mixed by Sean Everett, who's done Alabama Shakes and a bunch of those guys. That whole thing was mixed in 2 weeks, and it just has this amazing energy and very big deal. It was a send off for their singer Adrian Slattery, who in the making of that. It's just an awesome, with so many influences, and was just so much more epic than I expected when that came in. The Orb Weavers doing phenomenal. It's very creative and did their own artwork and everything. And just again, so much thanks to you and all the work that you did for your album Golden Moment, and just a lush arrangement of and I don't mean to put you on the spot, but when I see the album cover and you're just floating there, and I was like, how the hell did you do that? It's just you're floating in a forest. There's a lot of that in there. A lot of these, my throat's breaking up, but a lot of
you're getting
very
it's all right.
Yeah, absolutely. Just these suspended sounds and lots of space in there. Lots of ambient sounds, lots of from a listener's point of view, it draws you in, and there's this massive amount of light and shade in the energy on that album. So all kudos to you.
Thanks, man.
For that.
Yeah, appreciate that. Yeah, it was a pleasure to make it, and it was a pleasure bringing it to you. Having that that earlier session was really great, because I referenced trust earlier, so maybe I'll sort of finish on this, but trust being so important. It's one of the reasons I worked with Marty Brown on helping to produce it and mix it, but it's also why you were, my number one pick to come and work with, because I trust, obviously, your technical ability and is amazing, but trusting how you deal with music with like this, cotton gloves on. It's just like, I know you have such a reverence for music, and that it was going to be safe in your hands. You're going to take care of it. You weren't going to butcher it and just like get it out the door as another job. And you really have that attention to detail that I think is very rare. Like the patience, attention to detail, and the skill and care. It's a pretty winning combo. So thanks for your contribution to making it sound so deluxe, shall I say.
Cheers, Mia. Yeah. It's a big deal mastering. It's it's the final say. There's never a single doing things. So there's a bit of pressure there sometimes to get it right. And the busier you get, I'm finding lately, when you're busy, you just don't have time to risk having to redo things, and it has to be right.
Yeah.
First.
Yeah. Measure twice, master once.
Exactly. Yeah. Keep building.
Cool.
Yeah.
Thanks, Adam.
Good work, Mio, and we'll speak again soon.
Cool. Bye.
Yeah. Cheers.
So I hope you enjoyed that. Thanks to Adam for sharing his wealth of knowledge about mastering and all things. To learn more about Adam or to work with him, visit adamdempseymastering.com. You can find all the social links to him in the show notes as well. If you like to hear his mastering work on my latest album, Golden Moment, you can head to mijobiscan.com to stream it and get yourself a signed copy sent to you anywhere in the world. You can also get a free download of a few of the tracks from Golden Moment by going to mijobiscan.com/free music, as one word. And wherever you're watching or listening to this, please subscribe to get notifications of future episodes. Thanks for listening. Bye for now. Bye.